3 days before my daughter's wedding, I discovered that nearly every dollar I had saved over the last 40
Look at
years
this dream
was
ballroom.
gone.
The chandeliers are
Not
magical.
stolen by a
I
stranger.
can't believe this is my
Not
wedding.
lost
It's
in a
absolutely
scam.
perfect.
My own daughter had taken it. While I sat in my tiny kitchen staring at my empty savings account, Brianna was posting videos online about her dream luxury wedding in Charleston, smiling beneath chandeliers I never agreed to pay for. I could have called the police that same night. Instead, I decided to attend the wedding, and I brought a wedding gift no one in that ballroom would ever forget. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something honestly. If your own child betrayed you like this, what would you do? Would you forgive them? Or would that kind of pain change you forever? And if you're listening tonight, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Reading your comments reminds me I'm not alone in this world anymore. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes sharing our pain is how we finally begin to heal. My name is Lola Woods, and for most of my life, I believed that loving your child meant giving them everything you had. Not just your money, your time, your sleep, your dreams, your youth. I learned that lesson the hard way. I was 22 years old when I married Henry Woods. We were young, broke, and completely in love. Henry worked as an electrician for the city, and I had just started nursing at a small community hospital outside Cleveland. We didn't have much back then. Our first apartment had stained carpets and a heater that rattled all winter long. When it snowed hard, cold air slipped through the windows so badly we used towels to block the drafts. But I remember laughing there. God, we laughed so much. Henry used to dance with me in that tiny kitchen while grilled cheese sandwiches burned on the stove. Someday he'd whisper, spinning me around in my nursing scrubs, "I'm gonna give you a beautiful life, Lola." I used to tell him we already had one. Then Brianna was born. The moment I held her, everything in my world changed. She had Henry's eyes, big brown eyes that looked up at me like I was the safest person on earth. I loved her so fiercely it frightened me. Henry adored her too. He worked overtime constantly after she was born. He wanted her to have everything we never had growing up: a better school, a safer neighborhood, dance lessons, summer camps, a future bigger than ours. For a while, life felt almost perfect. Then Henry died. Just like that. One heart attack, one phone call, one terrible afternoon that split my life into before and after. Brianna was only 14 years old. I still remember her screaming in the hospital hallway when the doctor told us Henry was gone. I held her while she shook in my arms, and I made myself a promise that day. No matter what happened to me, my daughter would never feel abandoned. So I worked, and worked, and worked. I picked up double shifts at the hospital. Night shifts, holiday shifts, weekend shifts nobody else wanted. There were nights my feet hurt so badly, I cried while driving home. There were Christmas mornings when I smiled through exhaustion because Brianna deserved magic, even if I could barely stay awake. I stopped buying things for myself. I wore the same winter coat for 11 years. I skipped vacations, skipped dinners out, skipped everything that felt unnecessary. Every extra dollar went into savings, for Brianna, for college, for emergencies, for the future. After Henry died, I became terrified of instability. I knew how quickly life could destroy everything you loved, so I saved obsessively. A little here, a little there. Over decades, it became a substantial amount of money. Not enough to make me rich, but enough that I wouldn't become a burden when I got old. Enough for medication someday. Enough to repair the roof if it failed. Enough to survive. That money represented safety. It represented sacrifice. It represented every moment I chose responsibility over happiness. And Brianna knew that. That's the part that still hurts the most. When she was younger, she used to appreciate me. At least I thought she did. As a teenager, she'd leave little notes on the fridge before school. Love you, Mom. Don't work too hard. Thank you for everything. Sometimes I still find those old notes tucked inside kitchen drawers. I can barely look at them now. After college, things slowly started changing. Not all at once. That would have been easier to notice. It happened little by little. Brianna became obsessed with appearances, social media, designer handbags, perfect vacations, perfect photos, perfect life. At first I told myself it was normal. Young people cared about those things, but eventually every conversation started sounding the same. Who got promoted? Who bought a bigger house? Who had a luxury wedding? Who wore what? Who looked successful? Sometimes I'd sit across from her at dinner, feeling like I was listening to a stranger wearing my daughter's face. Still, I kept making excuses for her. Because mothers do that. We explain away the things that break our hearts. The first time I truly felt something was wrong happened 2 years before the wedding. Brianna came over for dinner one evening, wearing a cream-colored coat I knew cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Is that new? I asked carefully. She smiled. You only live once, Mom. Then she looked around my little kitchen. You know, she said casually, you should really renovate this place someday. I laughed softly. With what money? She shrugged. You have savings. Something about the way she said it unsettled me. Not concern, not love, awareness, calculation. I brushed the feeling aside immediately because I hated myself for even thinking that about my own daughter. A few months later, Brianna started making comments about my age. Not cruel comments, just strange ones. You should enjoy life more while you still can. You can't take money with you. You deserve to spoil yourself. At the time, I thought she was trying to encourage me. Now I wonder if she was trying to soften me up. Then came Caleb Turner. Tall, charming, perfect smile, expensive watch. The kind of man who shook your hand firmly while looking directly into your eyes. The kind of man who knew exactly how to make a good first impression. When Brianna introduced us, she looked happier than I'd seen her in years. And honestly, I wanted to love him. Because my daughter loved him. Or at least I thought she did. The first few months, Caleb treated me wonderfully. He called me Miss Lola. He brought flowers when he visited. He complimented my cooking. But every now and then, I caught flashes of something underneath the charm. Small moments, tiny cracks. He asked strange questions about the house, about retirement, about whether I planned to downsize someday. One night over dinner, he looked around my living room and smiled. This neighborhood's getting expensive now, he said casually. Your property value's probably doubled. I remember gripping my fork a little tighter. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe I was paranoid, but something inside me whispered that Caleb looked at life differently than Henry did. Henry saw people. Caleb saw opportunities. Still, when Brianna called me crying with happiness after Caleb proposed, I cried too. Because she was my daughter. And despite everything, I still wanted her dreams to come true. I just never imagined she'd steal mine to pay for them. The first time I met Caleb Turner, he brought me white lilies and called me Miss Lola, with a smile so polished it almost looked rehearsed. At the time, I thought that was charm. Now I know it was strategy. Brianna introduced him to me at a little Italian restaurant outside downtown Cleveland. I remember arriving early because I was nervous. My daughter sounded happier on the phone than she had in years, and after everything we'd been through since Henry died, all I wanted was to see that happiness last. When they walked in together, every woman in the restaurant looked up. Caleb had that kind of presence. Tall, clean-cut, expensive-looking without trying too hard. And Brianna, God, she looked radiant. Her cheeks were flushed pink, and she kept touching Caleb's arm every few seconds like she couldn't believe he was real. "Mom," she said breathlessly, "this is Caleb." He shook my hand firmly. "It's so nice to finally meet you," he said. "Brianna talks about you constantly." That sentence melted me instantly, because after years of feeling my daughter drifting further and further away, I wanted desperately to believe she still spoke about me with love. Dinner went beautifully that night. Caleb asked thoughtful questions about nursing, about Henry, about how hard it must have been raising Brianna alone. At one point, he even reached across the table and said, "You should be proud of yourself. Brianna's incredible." I nearly cried right there in the restaurant. No one had said something like that to me in a very long time. Not sincerely. When you spend decades surviving, people stop seeing your sacrifices. They only see the finished result. But Caleb noticed. Or at least he pretended to. For the first few months, I truly believed Brianna had found a good man. He sent flowers on Mother's Day. He helped carry groceries into my house. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge in my kitchen without being asked. Sometimes he'd stand beside Brianna with his arm around her waist, smiling like the kind of husband Henry used to be. Steady, protective, dependable. And maybe that's why I ignored the small warning signs when they first appeared. Because I wanted so badly to trust him. The first strange moment happened during Sunday dinner at my house. I had made pot roast mashed potatoes and green beans, the same meal Brianna begged for every birthday growing up. Caleb looked around my dining room while we ate. "You've kept this place in great shape," he said casually. I smiled. Henry loved this house. "It's worth a fortune now," he replied. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Not admiration, assessment, like he wasn't seeing my home. He was seeing numbers. Brianna laughed lightly. "Caleb's obsessed with real estate lately." He grinned. "Can you blame me? Property's the smartest investment there is." Then he looked at me. "You ever think about downsizing someday?" The question caught me off guard. "Not really," I answered carefully. "This house has too many memories." He nodded politely, but I noticed the quick glance he exchanged with Brianna. It lasted less than a second, but it bothered me all night. After that, the wedding planning began, and suddenly everything became expensive. Not normal expensive, insane expensive. Brianna called me almost daily with updates. "We found the perfect venue in Charleston. The photographer has a 2-year waiting list. You should see the floral arrangements, Mom." At first, I tried to be supportive. I really did. But every conversation sounded more like a luxury catalog than a marriage. One afternoon, Brianna drove me to a bridal boutique to show me dresses. The cheapest gown in the store cost more than my first car. I remember standing there touching price tags with trembling fingers, while Brianna spun happily in front of mirrors beneath crystal chandeliers. "What do you think?" she asked. She looked beautiful, but all I could think was, how can they afford this? Caleb worked in marketing. Brianna worked as a social media coordinator for a skincare company. They made decent money, sure. But not this kind of money. Not Charleston ballroom money. Not imported orchids money. Not luxury wedding planner money. Still, every time I gently asked questions, Brianna had an answer ready. Caleb got a big bonus. His uncle helped with some expenses. We're getting discounts through connections. The explanations came too quickly, too smoothly, like she'd rehearsed them. One evening, she invited me to tour the wedding venue virtually through a video call. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at marble floors, giant flower arches, gold candle displays, and a ballroom overlooking the water. "It's beautiful," I admitted softly. I know, Brianna whispered emotionally. It feels like a fairy tale. Then her expression shifted. But honestly, Mom, weddings like this are expected now. Expected by who I asked. She sighed dramatically. People notice these things. There it was again. People. Not love, not commitment, not marriage. Appearances. A few weeks later, I met Denise Turner for the first time. Caleb's mother arrived at a brunch wearing pearls and enough perfume to fill the restaurant. She hugged me tightly, but there was something cold beneath her smile. I've heard so much about you, she said. I smiled politely. Hopefully good things. Oh, of course, Denise laughed. Caleb says you'd do absolutely anything for Brianna. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now I hear the warning hidden inside it. Throughout brunch, Denise constantly discussed status. Who attended which country club? Whose daughter had a destination wedding in Italy? Which family spent 6 figures on flowers alone? I felt smaller every minute sitting there. Then Denise looked directly at Brianna. You only get one wedding, she said. People remember these events forever. Brianna nodded immediately. I know. Then Denise turned toward me with a sympathetic smile. I'm sure you understand wanting the best for your daughter. I suddenly felt like I was being tested, like there was a correct answer. So I forced a smile. Of course. After brunch, Brianna drove me home. The moment we pulled into my driveway, she looked at me nervously. You were kinda quiet back there. I'm just tired, I lied. She hesitated. Then she said the sentence that changed something between us. Mom, are you sure you can't help a little more with the wedding? I stared at her. Honey, I already offered $10,000. I know, but things are adding up. Brianna, $10,000 is a lot of money. Her jaw tightened slightly. Denise's family is covering way more than that. There it was. Comparison, competition, pressure. I took a slow breath. I'm doing what I can. She looked away toward the windshield. Sometimes it feels like you don't understand how important this is to me. That sentence hurt more than she realized, because my entire life had been built around understanding what was important to her. I worked double shifts for her, skipped vacations for her, buried my own dreams for her. And somehow, after all of that, I still wasn't enough. A week later, Brianna posted a video online titled, Planning My Luxury Dream Wedding. Thousands of people watched her smiling inside bridal boutiques and touring expensive venues. The comments flooded with admiration. You deserve this. Fairy tale wedding queen energy. I watched that video alone in my living room after a 12-hour hospital volunteer shift. And for the first time in my life, I felt jealous of my own daughter. Not because of the wedding. Because she still believed life owed her beautiful things. I lost that belief years ago. But even then, even with all the uneasiness growing inside me, I never imagined Brianna would betray me. I thought she was spoiled, influenced, lost. I did not think she was capable of stealing from me. That was the mistake that almost destroyed my life. Looking back now, I realize the warning signs were everywhere. I just kept refusing to see them. That's the dangerous thing about love, especially a mother's love. Sometimes your heart edits reality before your mind ever gets the chance to process it. A month before the wedding, strange little things started happening around my house. Small things, easy things to dismiss. One afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping and found a stack of mail already opened on the kitchen counter. At first, I thought maybe I had opened it myself and forgotten. But then I noticed one envelope from the bank had been sliced perfectly across the top with a letter opener. I never used a letter opener. I always tore envelopes open with my hands. I stood there staring at it for almost a full minute. Then, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe Brianna had stopped by and opened it by mistake while checking on the house. That's what I wanted to believe. A few days later, Brianna came over carrying iced coffees and acting unusually cheerful. She hugged me tightly the second she walked in. "You work too hard," she said. "I worry about you." I smiled tiredly. "That makes one of us." She laughed, but her eyes kept wandering around the kitchen, toward my desk, toward the cabinet where I kept paperwork, toward my phone charging beside the coffee maker. At the time, I barely noticed it. Now I remember every glance, every pause, every carefully casual question. "Did you ever figure out online banking?" she asked while stirring creamer into her coffee. "Mostly. You still use the same password, I think so." "You really should update things more often, Mom. Older people get targeted constantly." Older people. The phrase irritated me more than it should have, but before I could respond, she smiled sweetly and kissed my cheek. "I'm just trying to protect you. Protect me." God, that sentence still makes me sick. A week later, she offered to help organize my paperwork. I should have said no immediately. But Brianna had always been more technologically savvy than me. Ever since Henry died, I depended on her for things involving apps, passwords, digital forms, all of it. And honestly, part of me liked feeling taken care of by my daughter, even if only in small ways. So, I let her sit at my dining room table, sorting through folders while I cooked dinner. At one point, she held up a bank statement. "You really still keep this much money in savings?" I shrugged. "It's not as much as it looks. It's a lot for someone retired." "I'm not fully retired. You know what I mean." Then she smiled. "You should enjoy your money more." Again, that sentence. I heard it constantly during those months. You should enjoy your money. As if my life savings existed to be spent recklessly before I died. As if carefulness were somehow selfish. That night after dinner, Brianna asked to borrow my phone. "Mine's dead," she explained. "I need to confirm something with the florist." I handed it over without thinking. She sat quietly tapping the screen for several minutes. Longer than seemed necessary. "What are you doing?" I asked casually. Nothing, she answered quickly. "The florist's website is freezing." Then she smiled too brightly and handed my phone back. At the time, I didn't question it. Now I know exactly what she was doing. Setting up access. A few days later, I met my friend Patricia for lunch. We'd worked together at the hospital for years before she retired. Halfway through our meal, she leaned across the table. So she said carefully that wedding must be costing a fortune. I laughed nervously. "You're telling me?" She posted another video yesterday. "That venue looks expensive?" I nodded. Patricia hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. "Can they actually afford all that?" The question instantly made me defensive. "Caleb's doing well financially." That tiny sound irritated me. "What's that supposed to mean?" Patricia sighed. "Lola, don't get mad at me. I'm just saying, sometimes young people get caught up trying to impress others." I stared down at my coffee. "I know. You've always spoiled Brianna a little." I looked up sharply. "She's my daughter." "I know she is. But there's a difference between helping your child and teaching them there are no limits." That sentence stayed with me long after lunch ended, because deep down, I knew she was right. Henry used to say the same thing, not cruelly, not judgmentally, just honestly. "Lola," he'd tell me gently, "you can love her without giving her everything she asks for." But guilt makes people weak. After Henry died, guilt shaped almost every parenting decision I made. I felt guilty Brianna lost her father. Guilty she grew up watching me struggle. Guilty she never got the stable childhood we'd planned. So whenever she wanted something, I found a way to say yes. Dance classes, spring break trips, designer shoes in college, help with rent after graduation, even when I couldn't really afford it. I convinced myself I was helping her heal. Maybe all I really did was teach her my boundaries didn't matter. The real panic started 2 weeks before the wedding. I had gone to the pharmacy after church when my debit card was declined. I laughed awkwardly and told the cashier it must have been a system error. But inside my stomach dropped. I knew how much money was in that account, or at least I thought I did. I paid with a credit card and sat in my car afterward, staring at my hands gripping the steering wheel. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. When I got home, I logged into my banking app. At first, I thought I was reading the screen incorrectly. The balance looked too low. Much too low. I refreshed the app twice, then 3 times. Still the same number. My pulse began hammering violently in my chest. No, I whispered out loud. I started scrolling through transactions. Large withdrawals, electronic transfers, payment confirmations, thousands. Then tens of thousands. Wedding planner, luxury venue, designer bridal boutique, floral company, catering deposits. My breathing became shallow. I sat frozen in my living room while transaction after transaction blurred together in front of my eyes. Some of the charges went back weeks. How had I not noticed? Then I remembered. Paperless billing, app notifications turned off. Brianna helping organize my accounts. My hands started shaking so badly I dropped the phone. I remember bending down slowly to pick it up because suddenly I felt old in a way I never had before. Not physically old, vulnerable old, the kind of old predators look for. I called Brianna immediately. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. Then suddenly my phone buzzed. A text from Brianna. Sorry, at cake tasting with Caleb Lowell. What's up, cake tasting? While my life was collapsing. I stared at that message for a very long time. Then another notification appeared. A voicemail. From Karen Mitchell at the bank. Lola, hi. This is Karen. Please give me a call when you can. There are some account activities I need to discuss with you in person. My blood ran cold. In person. Not over the phone. In person. That's when I knew this wasn't confusion. This wasn't an accident. Something terrible had happened. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath all the denial and excuses and motherly loyalty, I already knew who had done it. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. I barely slept the night before meeting Karen Mitchell at the bank. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers disappearing from my account. 40 years of sacrifice. 40 years of saying no to myself. Gone. Around 3 a.m, I got out of bed and walked through my house in silence. The old hardwood floors creaked beneath my feet. Henry used to complain about those floors constantly. Someday, I'm replacing every board in this place, he'd say. But he never got the chance. I stood in our old living room staring at the framed photograph above the fireplace. Henry holding 14-year-old Brianna on the day she won her middle school dance competition. She was smiling so wide her eyes nearly disappeared. Back then, she still looked at us like we hung the moon. I touched the frame gently. How did we get here? I whispered. But houses don't answer questions like that. Only silence does. The next morning, I drove to the bank with my stomach tied in knots. Karen Mitchell had known me for nearly 20 years. We met when the hospital organized a financial literacy program for nurses nearing retirement. She was smart, calm, the kind of woman who never created drama unless something truly serious was happening. That terrified me. When I entered the bank, Karen spotted me immediately and stood up from behind her desk. The expression on her face made my heart sink before she even spoke. Lola, she said softly, come with me. She led me into a private office and closed the door carefully behind us. There was already another man seated at the table. mid-40s, dark suit, reading glasses. Karen introduced him quietly. This is Marcus Reed from our Fraud Investigations Department. Fraud Investigations. The words made my chest tighten instantly. I sat down slowly. Karen folded her hands. Before we begin, she said gently, I need to ask you a few questions. I nodded numbly. Have you personally authorized any large withdrawals or electronic transfers over the last 6 weeks? No? Have you given anyone access to your banking credentials? No. Then I hesitated. Well, my daughter helped me with online banking a few times. Karen and Marcus exchanged a quick glance. Not dramatic, not surprised, just confirming something they already suspected. Marcus slid several printed pages across the table toward me. Mrs. Woods, he said carefully, these are the transactions we're concerned about. My hands shook as I picked them up. The first page alone nearly made me sick. $18,400, Charleston Grand Harbor Venue, $9,750, Ivory Lace Bridal Couture, $12,200, Southern Crown Catering, $6,900, Floral Elegance Design Studio. I stopped breathing for a second. My vision blurred. No, I whispered. Karen reached across the table. Lola. No, I repeated louder this time. No, there has to be some mistake. Marcus spoke gently. We investigated unusual activity after multiple high-value transactions triggered alerts. I looked up at him helplessly. But I never approved these. We know. Karen pushed a tissue box toward me. I hadn't even realized tears were already sliding down my face. Then Marcus turned another page toward me. These transactions were authenticated using your online banking profile. I stared at the timestamps. IP addresses, verification codes, electronic approvals. It looked official, legitimate, like I had willingly drained my own life savings. But I didn't do this, I whispered. Marcus nodded sympathetically. We believe someone gained authorized access through a trusted device. My stomach dropped. Trusted device. My phone. Brianna borrowing my phone. Brianna helping organize my accounts. Brianna asking about passwords. Suddenly, every strange moment from the last month crashed together inside my head all at once. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Karen spoke softly. Lola, there's more. I looked at her slowly. She handed me another sheet. This one contained transfer details connected to a business account. Turner Event Consulting, LLC. The name hit me instantly. Turner. Caleb Turner. A large transfer, nearly $20,000, had been routed there. What is this? I asked weakly. Marcus adjusted his glasses. The account appears connected to Caleb Turner. I felt physically ill, not emotionally. Physically, like my body itself was rejecting the truth. Karen leaned forward carefully. We cannot accuse anyone officially without a full investigation, but the pattern here strongly suggests someone close to you accessed your accounts knowingly. Close to me. I almost laughed. What a polite way to describe betrayal. I stared down at the pages again. Every transaction represented something I had denied myself over decades. The Hawaii trip Henry and I never took. The kitchen renovation we postponed. The retirement I kept delaying. The medications I worried about affording someday. Everything. Gone. And all for flowers. Champagne, designer shoes, Instagram photos. Suddenly, I heard myself ask the question I'd been avoiding since I walked into that office. How much is left? Karen's eyes filled with pity. Very little. I closed my eyes. Very little. 40 years reduced to 2 words. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Karen carefully reached into a folder beside her. "There's something else you need to see." She handed me printed screenshots, emails, confirmation notices, security verification messages, all forwarded automatically to another address. An address connected to Brianna. My entire body went cold. Not suspicion anymore. Not fear. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof. I stared at my daughter's email address printed across the page, while something inside me quietly broke apart. She knew I whispered. Karen said nothing. She knew exactly what she was doing. Marcus spoke carefully. "Mrs. Woods, at this point you have several options." I looked at him blankly. "You can file a formal fraud claim. We can also involve law enforcement if you choose." Law enforcement. Against my own daughter. I suddenly remembered Brianna at 6 years old, sitting on my lap while I braided her hair before school. I remembered helping her practice spelling words, holding her after nightmares, singing to her when she had the flu. And now strangers were asking if I wanted to report her for financial fraud. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Karen must have seen panic rising in my face because she spoke quickly. "You don't need to decide everything today." "But she stole from me," I whispered. Saying it aloud shattered me. Karen's expression softened. "Yes," she said quietly. "She did." I covered my mouth as sobs finally broke free. Not loud, dramatic sobs, the kind that come from somewhere deep and exhausted. The kind that sound almost embarrassed to exist. Karen moved beside me immediately, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Lola. I don't understand," I cried. "Why would she do this to me?" Neither Karen nor Marcus answered. Because there was no answer that could make betrayal hurt less. After several minutes, Marcus handed me another document. "This authorizes us to freeze further outgoing transactions immediately." I signed it automatically. Then another paper, then another. Everything felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life collapse. Before I left, Karen squeezed my hands tightly. "You need to protect yourself now." I nodded weakly, but even walking out of that bank with evidence in my purse, part of me still wanted Brianna to walk through the door and tell me there had been some terrible misunderstanding. That's the cruel thing about being a mother. Even when the truth is sitting directly in front of you, love still begs for another explanation. But deep down, I already knew. My daughter hadn't stolen from me because she was desperate. She stole from me because somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing my sacrifices as sacrifices. She started seeing them as resources. And that realization hurt far more than the money ever could. I sat in my car outside the bank for almost an hour before I drove home. The folder Karen gave me rested on the passenger seat like a bomb I was too afraid to touch. Every few minutes, I glanced at it again, hoping the papers inside would somehow change. That the numbers would disappear. That Brianna's email address would vanish from the page. That I would wake up from whatever nightmare this was. But reality stayed exactly where I left it. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were numb from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I walked into the house slowly. Everything looked the same. The family photos, Henry's old recliner, the clock above the stove ticking steadily. How strange that ordinary life continues even after your heart breaks. I placed the folder on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Brianna. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom," she said brightly. "Sorry, things have been crazy over here." Her voice sounded so normal, so cheerful. It made me physically ill. "I need you to come over." I said quietly. A pause. Right now? Yes. Another pause. What's wrong? We need to talk. My voice must have sounded strange because her tone shifted immediately. Mom, you're scaring me. I almost laughed at the irony. Just come over. An hour later, Brianna walked into my house carrying 2 iced coffees, like this was any ordinary afternoon. She froze the moment she saw my face. Mom, I pointed toward the kitchen table. Sit down. Her eyes immediately dropped to the folder. I watched fear flicker across her expression before she forced a smile. What's going on? I didn't answer. I opened the folder slowly and spread the papers across the table between us. Bank statements, transfers, verification logs, wedding payments. The color drained from her face instantly. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Where did you get those?" The question itself was an admission. I felt something inside me crack. You stole from me. Her eyes filled immediately with tears. No, Mom, you stole from me? This time, my voice shook harder. Brianna started crying almost instantly. The same cry she used as a child whenever she got caught doing something wrong. Except now, she was 29 years old. Please, let me explain. Explain what I snapped suddenly. Explain how my entire savings account disappeared into flower arrangements and ballroom deposits. It's not what you think. I stared at her in disbelief. What exactly am I supposed to think? She buried her face in her hands. I was going to pay it back. There it was, the sentence people always use when they know they're guilty. I laughed bitterly. With what money, Brianna? We just needed help temporarily. You mean you needed 40 years of my life temporarily? She flinched like I'd slapped her. Good. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wanted her to feel even a fraction of my pain. Brianna wiped her eyes desperately. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. I stared at her silently. Denise kept comparing our wedding to other weddings. Caleb said people would judge us if things looked cheap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you robbed your mother? I didn't rob you. The sudden sharpness in her voice stunned me. I had access to the account. You had access because I trusted you. She started crying harder. I was going to replace the money after the wedding. How? Silence. How, Brianna? She looked away. That was answer enough. I felt my chest tighten painfully. Not from anger, from heartbreak, because sitting across from me no longer felt like my daughter. It felt like a stranger trying to justify destroying me. Then Brianna said the sentence I will never fully forgive. You still have the house. I blinked slowly. What? You're not homeless, Mom. I stared at her, unable to speak. She kept going, desperate now. You still have somewhere to live. You still have retirement income. It's not like you're completely ruined. Not completely ruined. I suddenly saw every sacrifice of my life collapsing into dust right in front of me. Do you hear yourself? I whispered. Brianna immediately softened again. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. No. Yes, you did. My voice broke. You looked at my life savings and decided I didn't need them anymore. Tears streamed down her face. You're making me sound horrible. I almost laughed again. Making her sound horrible. What exactly did she think stealing from an elderly widow sounded like? Before I could answer, the front door opened. Caleb. Of course. He walked in carrying his usual perfect confidence, but the moment he saw the papers spread across the table, his expression changed. What's going on? he asked carefully. Brianna looked at him helplessly. She knows. The room went silent. Caleb's eyes moved slowly toward me, and for the first time since I met him, the mask slipped. Not completely, just enough. I saw irritation before sympathy, calculation before guilt. He pulled out a chair calmly and sat beside Brianna. "Miss Lola," he said gently, "I think maybe everybody needs to take a breath." I stared at him. "You knew. We were trying to handle things. You transferred money into your business account." His jaw tightened slightly. That wasn't theft. Then what was it? He leaned back calmly, like this was a business meeting instead of the destruction of my life. Brianna was under enormous pressure. "So you encouraged her to steal from me. We viewed it as borrowing. There was no agreement. We planned to repay everything." With what money, he didn't answer directly. Instead, he folded his hands and spoke in that smooth voice of his. "Look, weddings are complicated. Costs got out of control." Brianna panicked. I stared at him in disbelief. "You spent my retirement savings on a party." His expression hardened slightly. "It's not just a party. It's our future. Our future." I looked at Brianna, and suddenly I understood something horrifying. She had convinced herself this was justified. Not criminal. Not cruel. Justified. Because in her mind, her happiness mattered more than my security. Caleb leaned forward. "Honestly, Miss Lola, families help each other." My entire body went cold. Families help each other. The audacity of that sentence nearly stole the air from my lungs. "Families don't steal from each other," I whispered. Brianna reached for my hand. "Mom, please," I pulled away immediately. The hurt on her face should have affected me. But all I could think about was her sitting beside this man while my savings drained away transaction by transaction. Then Caleb said something that changed everything. "If you report this," he said carefully, "you could ruin Brianna's life." The room went silent again. "There it is," I said softly. "What? The real concern?" Brianna looked panicked. "Mom, please don't do this." Caleb continued calmly. "There's no reason to destroy your relationship over money." Over money? I stared at him in disbelief. This man genuinely thought the money was the worst part. Not the betrayal, not the lies, not the manipulation. The money. Then Brianna whispered the final knife into my heart. "If you loved me, you wouldn't call the police." I looked at my daughter for a very long time after she said that, because suddenly I realized something devastating. My love had become a weapon she expected to use against me. And maybe that was my fault. Maybe I had spent so many years sacrificing myself that Brianna stopped believing I had limits at all. I stood up slowly from the table. "I want both of you to leave. Mom, now." Brianna began sobbing harder. Caleb stood carefully. "We can work this out." I looked directly into his eyes. "No," I said quietly. "You already worked it out. You just forgot to ask me." Then I walked to the front door and opened it. For once in her life, Brianna looked afraid of me. Not because I yelled, not because I threatened her, because she realized something had changed. I was finally seeing her clearly, and once that happens, nothing is ever the same again. After Brianna and Caleb left my house, I locked the front door and stood there with my hand still gripping the knob long after their car disappeared down the street. The silence inside the house felt enormous. Heavy, like the walls themselves knew something had broken that could never fully be repaired. I walked slowly back into the kitchen and looked at the 2 untouched iced coffees Brianna had brought earlier. One of them still had lipstick on the straw, For some reason, that tiny detail destroyed me. I sank into a chair and cried harder than I had cried the day Henry died. Not because losing Henry hurt less, but because death is cruel in an honest way. Betrayal isn't. Betrayal smiles at you while it empties your bank account. It hugs you while lying to your face. It calls you mom while calculating what you're worth. At some point, I must have cried myself into exhaustion because when I finally looked at the clock, it was nearly midnight. My phone buzzed beside me. 23 missed calls from Brianna, 7 from Caleb, 3 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I stood up, washed my face, and did something I should have done years ago. I stopped thinking like a mother for 5 minutes and started thinking like a woman trying to survive. That night, I pulled every document I could find from my office cabinet. Bank records, insurance papers, tax returns, retirement information, Henry's old legal folders. I spread everything across the dining room table like evidence in a courtroom, because that's exactly what it was becoming. Around 1 a.m, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Brianna. "Mom, please answer me." Another one came seconds later. I made a mistake. Then, Caleb pushed me into this. I stared at that message for a long time, not because I believed it completely, but because part of me probably always would. That's the curse of motherhood. Even after your child hurts you, your heart still searches for reasons to protect them. But then another memory surfaced. Brianna, sitting at my kitchen table asking about my passwords. Brianna borrowing my phone. Brianna telling me I didn't need the money anymore. No. Caleb may have encouraged it, but my daughter still chose it. I set the phone face down and kept working. By sunrise, I had made 3 separate folders. One for financial records, one for digital evidence, one for legal documents. My nursing years taught me something important. When people panic, details matter. And I wasn't going to let Brianna or Caleb rewrite what happened later. The next morning, I drove back to the bank. Karen looked relieved when she saw me. "I'm glad you came," she said gently. "I need copies of everything." She nodded immediately. For the next hour, Karen and Marcus helped me print transaction histories, account access logs, device authorizations, verification timestamps, and transfer records. The stack of paper kept growing. Every page felt heavier than the last. Marcus highlighted several sections with a pen. "These IP addresses repeatedly accessed your account from the same device," he explained. I looked down at the reports. One of the device names made my stomach twist. Brianna's iPhone. Documented, timestamped, undeniable. Karen handed me another file. "These were the email forwarding rules attached to your account." I stared at the screen. Every bank notification had secretly been redirected to Brianna's email address. For weeks. Maybe longer. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't panic. It was planned. That realization changed something inside me permanently. When I left the bank, Karen touched my arm gently. "Lola, you need legal protection immediately." I nodded. "I know." That afternoon, I called Samuel Brooks, the same attorney Henry and I used years ago when we updated our will. Samuel was in his early 70s, now semi-retired with silver hair, and the same calm voice I remembered from decades earlier. The moment I explained why I was calling, he went very quiet. Then he said softly, "Come see me tomorrow morning." His office sat in an old brick building downtown. Walking in there felt strangely comforting. The furniture hadn't changed in 20 years. Neither had the smell of coffee and paper. Samuel listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The bank statements, the transfers, the confrontation, Caleb's involvement. When I finally finished, he removed his glasses slowly. "Do you want my honest opinion?" "Yes." "This wasn't desperation," he said bluntly. "This was entitlement." The word hit hard because it was true. Samuel folded his hands carefully. "Your daughter believed your money belonged to her already." I looked away silently. He continued, "And based on what you're describing, Mr. Turner absolutely manipulated the situation." "I don't know what to do," I admitted quietly. Samuel studied me for a moment. "Yes, you do." I frowned. "No, I don't. You just don't like the answer." That was true too, because the answer was terrifying. Protect yourself, even if it means hurting your child. Samuel opened a legal pad. "First, we document everything. For the next 2 hours, we organized evidence. Transaction timelines, digital access records, witnesses, messages, potential fraud claims." Samuel was meticulous. At one point, he looked up at me seriously. "Lola, if this goes to court, emotion won't matter. Documentation will." So I documented everything. Every text. Every suspicious conversation. Every timeline detail I could remember. Then, Samuel asked the question I had been dreading. "Do you intend to press charges?" I froze. The room suddenly felt too warm. "I don't know." "That's understandable. She's still my daughter." "Yes," he said gently. "But you're also still a victim." I covered my face briefly with my hands. "I keep thinking about when she was little." Samuel's voice softened. Good mothers always do. Tears burned behind my eyes again. "I failed her somehow." "No," he said firmly. "You loved her without boundaries. That's not the same thing." That sentence sat heavily inside me, because deep down I knew he was right. I had spent decades proving my love through sacrifice. And somewhere along the way, Brianna stopped seeing sacrifice as something meaningful. It became expected. Samuel opened another folder from Henry's old records. Before he passed, he said carefully, "Henry left several protective documents regarding your property." I looked up in surprise. "What do you mean he was concerned you might eventually be pressured financially?" A strange chill ran through me. Samuel slid paperwork across the desk. The house was fully protected in my name through specific legal structures Henry had established years earlier. No spouse, no child, no outside party could force its sale without my direct authorization. I stared at the documents silently. Henry had seen this possibility long before I did. Samuel hesitated. "There's also something else." He opened a smaller envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. Henry's handwriting. My breath caught instantly. He asked me to give this to Brianna only if... Samuel paused gently. If the family ever broke apart over money. I felt tears sting my eyes immediately. Even now. Even after death. Henry was still trying to protect us. I unfolded the letter carefully with trembling hands. The first line alone shattered me. "To my little girl, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong." I started crying before I could continue. Samuel gave me time. After several minutes, I wiped my eyes and looked up at him. "What do I do now?" He studied me carefully. Then he said something unexpected. "Tell the truth." I frowned slightly. "What?" "People like Caleb survive because everyone protects appearances. They count on shame keeping victims quiet." I stared at him. "You think I should expose them?" "I think," Samuel said calmly, "you should stop protecting people who were willing to destroy you." The room fell silent. Then slowly, an idea began forming in my mind. Painful, terrifying, but clear. I looked down at Henry's letter again. then at the evidence stacked across Samuel's desk, then back at him. "The wedding's in 6 days." Samuel nodded carefully. "Yes." I took a long breath. "They want a perfect wedding so badly?" My voice turned colder than I recognized. "Fine." I folded Henry's letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. "I'll give them a wedding they'll never forget." That night, I sat alone in my living room with Henry's letter in my lap for nearly 3 hours before I finally found the courage to read the rest of it. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. I could almost imagine Henry sitting in his recliner beside me, half watching television, while pretending not to fall asleep. God, I missed him, especially then. Because if Henry had still been alive, none of this would have happened. Not because he was controlling, not because Brianna feared him, but because Henry understood something I never truly learned. Love without boundaries eventually turns into permission. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter again. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. Henry's handwriting looked exactly the same as I remembered, slanted, steady, patient. I started reading slowly. "To my little girl, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. And if I know your mother, she's probably blaming herself for it. So before anything else, I need you both to hear me clearly. Lola loved you more than anyone I've ever known. If she made mistakes raising you, they came from loving too hard, not too little." By the second paragraph, tears blurred the words completely. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stop myself from sobbing out loud. Because Henry understood me, even after all these years, even after death. He understood exactly who I was. I kept reading. "Brianna, your mother would hand you the last dollar in her pocket if she thought it could save you pain. But someday, you'll become an adult, and adult love requires responsibility. If you ever start believing your mother exists to sacrifice endlessly for you, you will break her heart without even realizing you're doing it." I closed my eyes. The words felt unbearable now. Not because Henry was wrong, because he was right. Painfully right. I remembered all the times Henry tried gently warning me while Brianna was growing up. "She needs consequences, Lola. You don't always have to rescue her. You're teaching her that your needs come last." And every single time I defended her. Because I thought protecting Brianna from disappointment made me a good mother. Maybe all I really did was teach her that disappointment belonged to everyone except her. I stood up and walked slowly into the kitchen. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too full of memories. I opened the refrigerator without thinking, stared blankly inside, then closed it again. I wasn't hungry. I was grieving. Not just the money. Not even the betrayal. I was grieving the daughter I thought I had. The next morning, Samuel called me. I've been reviewing everything he said carefully. "Legally speaking, your case is very strong." I sat at my kitchen table, gripping my coffee mug. "Strong enough for criminal charges." Yes. The word hit harder than I expected. Criminal. Not family disagreement. Not misunderstanding. Crime. Samuel continued. "There's also another concern. What if Caleb had succeeded in manipulating Brianna further? Your home may have been next." A cold chill ran through me. Because deep down, I already knew that. I remembered Caleb asking about property values, about downsizing, about retirement, about family helping family. I suddenly imagined myself old and vulnerable, pressured into selling the house Henry built with his own hands. The thought made me physically ill. Samuel must have heard the silence on the line. "Lola, I'm here. You need to understand something very clearly." His voice turned firmer. "Stopping this now may not only save your future, it may save your daughter's too." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended, because for the first time, I stopped viewing what I planned to do as revenge. Maybe this wasn't revenge at all. Maybe this was the first boundary I had ever truly set with Brianna. Later that afternoon, I drove to Charleston for the wedding weekend. The city looked exactly like the kind of place Brianna had always dreamed about. Historic buildings, fancy restaurants, carriages moving through downtown streets, everything polished, elegant, expensive. I checked into a small hotel 20 minutes away from the luxury resort where the wedding would happen. Not because I couldn't stay there, because I refused to spend another dollar pretending everything was normal. That evening, Brianna called me repeatedly. I ignored the first 4 calls. Finally, on the 5th, I answered. "Mom?" she said immediately, sounding exhausted. "Why are you ignoring me?" I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I asked softly, "Are you sorry for what you did?" Silence. Not immediate remorse. Not heartbreak. Calculation. Then she sighed shakily. "I already told you things got out of control. That wasn't my question." Another silence. Finally, she whispered, "Yes." But something about the answer felt incomplete, like she was sorry she got caught more than sorry she stole from me. I stared out the hotel window toward the Charleston harbor lights. "Do you love him?" I asked suddenly. "Who, Caleb? Of course I do." "Enough to destroy your mother for him, Mom!" "No. Answer the question." Her breathing became uneven. "You don't understand how hard this has been." I closed my eyes. There it was again. Not concern for me, not guilt, only her suffering, her stress, her embarrassment, her pressure. Everything always circled back to Brianna. Finally, she whispered, "Please don't ruin my wedding." I almost laughed at the wording. Not "please forgive me." "Please let me fix this." "Please believe I'm still your daughter." Just, "Please don't ruin my wedding." That sentence told me everything. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began building the presentation. At first, my hands shook too badly to work. But gradually, the anger steadied me. Not wild anger, cold anger, focused anger. The kind that comes after grief burns itself empty. I created slides carefully. Family photos first. Henry holding baby Brianna. Our old Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, dance recitals, hospital graduation, then the transition, bank statements, transfers, verification codes, wedding invoices, account access logs. Everything dated, everything documented, everything undeniable. I stared at the final slide for a long time before typing the words. Love is not permission to betray. Simple, direct, true. The next morning, Maya Collins knocked on my hotel room door. Brianna's maid of honor looked nervous enough to faint. She sat across from me, twisting her hands tightly together. "I feel horrible," she admitted immediately. "You didn't do this." "No, but I knew something was wrong." I stayed silent. Maya swallowed hard. "A few weeks ago, Caleb got drunk after Brianna left dinner early." My chest tightened. He started bragging about what she looked down. He said once the wedding was over, Brianna would eventually convince you to help them with the house too. The room went still. He actually said that Maya nodded miserably. He kept calling it future family assets. For several seconds, I couldn't speak, because hearing someone reduce my entire life into assets felt almost inhuman. Maya's eyes filled with tears. "I should have told you sooner." "You're telling me now." She wiped her face quickly. "There's more." My stomach tightened again. "Caleb has debt, Mrs. Woods. A lot of it." "How much?" "I don't know exactly, but enough that he's been borrowing money from friends." Suddenly, every piece fit together. The pressure, the spending, the manipulation. the desperation hidden beneath all that polished charm. This wedding wasn't just about status, it was survival for Caleb, and Brianna had become the bridge leading directly to my savings. Maya looked terrified. Are you really going to expose them at the wedding? I thought about Henry's letter, about 40 years of sacrifice, about Brianna telling me I didn't need the money anymore. Then I answered honestly, I'm going to tell the truth. Maya nodded slowly, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I no longer felt afraid. I felt ready. The morning before the wedding, I woke up before sunrise and sat quietly on the balcony outside my hotel room, watching the Charleston harbor glow beneath pale blue light. For a few minutes, the world looked peaceful, almost gentle, the kind of morning Henry would have loved. He used to wake up early on purpose during vacations just to drink coffee outside before everyone else got up. Best part of the day, he'd always say, silence before the world starts pretending again. I held my coffee cup tightly and thought about that sentence for a long time. Because pretending was exactly what everyone around me was doing now. Pretending Brianna was a glowing bride instead of a woman who had stolen from her widowed mother. Pretending Caleb was a successful gentleman instead of a manipulator drowning in debt. Pretending this wedding was built on love instead of lies. My phone buzzed on the small metal table beside me. Brianna. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom. Her voice sounded fragile, tired, like she hadn't slept much either. Hi. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke. I know you're angry. Angry. What a small word for this kind of pain. I'm more than angry, Brianna. She inhaled shakily. I need today to go smoothly. I stared out toward the water. Do you? Yes? Why another silence? Then she answered honestly for the first time in weeks. Because if this wedding falls apart now, my whole life falls apart. There it was. Not our relationship, not my trust, not my heartbreak. Her life. Always her life. I closed my eyes briefly. Have you told anyone what happened? No. Not even your bridesmaids know. Does Denise know Brianna hesitated too long? She knows some of it. Of course she did. Women like Denise always knew exactly where money came from. They just preferred not to ask questions if the answer benefited them. I took a slow breath. Are you planning to repay me? Yes. How we'll figure it out. Same answer. Still no plan. Still no responsibility. I finally asked the question that had haunted me for days. If I never found out, would you have told me silence? Longer this time. Painful. Then finally, I don't know. That answer hurt more than a lie would have, because it was probably the truth. My own daughter might have watched me grow old and financially vulnerable while pretending nothing happened. I suddenly felt exhausted. Not physically. Spiritually exhausted. Mom Brianna whispered. Yes, please don't humiliate me tomorrow. I looked down at Henry's letter resting beside me on the table. Then I answered quietly, that depends on what you think humiliation really is. Before she could respond, I ended the call. Around noon, I drove to the wedding venue for the rehearsal lunch. The Charleston Grand Harbor Resort looked even more extravagant in person than it had in photos. Massive white columns, crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers everywhere, staff members rushing around carrying gold-trimmed decorations. Everything looked perfect, artificially perfect. The moment I stepped inside, I saw Denise Turner directing workers near the ballroom entrance like a queen inspecting her palace. When she noticed me, her smile tightened instantly. Lola, she said smoothly. You made it. I did. She air-kissed my cheek without warmth. I was beginning to worry you might not come. I looked directly into her eyes. Oh, I wouldn't miss this. Something in my tone must have unsettled her because her smile flickered briefly. Then she recovered immediately. Well, she said brightly, Brianna looks absolutely stunning. This wedding is going to be unforgettable. Yes, it was. Just not for the reasons she thought. Inside the ballroom, workers adjusted towering flower arrangements while soft piano music played through hidden speakers. Everywhere I looked, I saw my money. The imported roses, the champagne towers, the gold table settings, the giant custom ice sculpture near the dance floor. I felt sick, but strangely calm too, because once grief reaches a certain depth, fear disappears. Brianna spotted me near the entrance and hurried over immediately. She wore a white rehearsal dress and expensive heels Henry would have called ankle breakers. For a moment, seeing her standing there smiling nervously almost broke my resolve. She still looked like my little girl sometimes, especially around the eyes. "Mom," she said softly. I nodded. "You look nice." Relief flooded her face instantly at my calm tone. "Thank you." For a few seconds, we just stood there awkwardly. Then she leaned closer. "Can we please just get through tomorrow?" There was desperation in her voice now. Real desperation. I looked at her carefully. "Did Caleb tell you to say that?" Her face tightened. "No." But she looked away too quickly. Across the ballroom, Caleb stood laughing with several groomsmen holding a glass of whiskey, like he didn't have a care in the world. When his eyes met mine, his smile faded slightly. Good. For once, I wanted him uncomfortable. A few minutes later, he walked over. "Miss Lola," he said warmly. "Glad you could make it." I noticed the tension beneath his voice immediately. He was nervous. Maybe not about guilt, but definitely about control. I smiled politely. Beautiful venue. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you. We wanted something special." Special. What an interesting word for stolen luxury. Denise joined us again, carrying a champagne flute. "I keep telling everyone this wedding belongs in a magazine." Then she looked at me carefully. "I hope we can all focus on celebrating family this weekend." There it was. The warning hidden beneath politeness. Behave yourself. Protect appearances. Stay quiet. I smiled calmly. Oh, I care very much about family. For the first time, Denise looked uncertain. That afternoon, while everyone rehearsed ceremony entrances, I slipped quietly into a small conference room beside the ballroom with my laptop. My heart pounded as I connected the USB drive to test the presentation. Slide after slide illuminated the screen. Photos, transfers, proof. Henry's letter. The final slide appeared. "Love is not permission to betray." I stared at it silently. Then I closed the laptop again. No turning back now. That evening, just before sunset, Maya Collins found me standing alone outside near the water. "You okay?" she asked softly. I almost laughed at the question. "No." She nodded sadly. "I'm sorry." I looked toward the ballroom windows where guests laughed inside beneath glowing lights. "Did Brianna ever really love him?" I asked quietly. Maya hesitated. "I think she loved the version of herself she became with him." That answer pierced straight through me because I understood exactly what she meant. Caleb made Brianna feel admired, important, elegant, desired. And somewhere along the way, my daughter became addicted to the image of that life, even if it cost her soul. Maya looked nervous again. "There's something else you should know." My stomach tightened. What I overheard Caleb talking on the phone earlier. She swallowed hard. He said once the wedding gifts came in, things would finally calm down financially. I stared at her. He's counting on wedding gifts to survive. She nodded slowly, and he sounded desperate. Suddenly, everything became even clearer. This entire wedding was balancing on the edge of collapse. Debt, lies, manipulation, stolen money. And tomorrow, they planned to stand in front of God pretending it was love. That night, back at my hotel room, I laid Henry's letter beside the USB drive on the bed. One represented the man who spent his life protecting our family. The other represented the truth about the people trying to destroy it. I stared at both for a long time. Then I whispered softly into the empty room, "I'm sorry, Henry. But tomorrow, I stopped protecting them." The morning of the wedding arrived bright, warm, and painfully beautiful. Sunlight poured through the curtains of my hotel room, while church bells rang somewhere in the distance across Charleston. For one terrible moment before memory fully returned, I almost felt normal. Then I saw the garment bag hanging beside the closet. The navy blue dress I'd chosen for the wedding, and reality crashed back into me all at once. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at that dress for a very long time. Henry bought it for me 12 years earlier for a hospital fundraising dinner. "You look classy in blue," he'd said while grinning proudly. I almost wore black to the wedding instead. Something colder. Harder. But in the end, I chose the navy dress because Henry loved it. And because I needed to remember who I was before all this pain. Not just a betrayed mother. A woman. A wife. A human being who deserved dignity. By noon, the resort buzzed with excitement. Guests filled the lobby carrying wrapped gifts and champagne bottles. Women in pastel dresses posed for photos near the waterfront. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. Everyone looked happy. That was the strange thing. The world keeps celebrating even when your own heart is bleeding. As I walked toward the ballroom, I noticed several guests smiling politely at me. Mother of the bride. "Yes," I answered softly. "You must be so proud." That sentence nearly broke me every single time, because once upon a time, I would have been. Inside the bridal suite hallway, wedding staff rushed back and forth carrying makeup kits, bouquets, steaming trays of food, and garment bags. The entire place smelled like roses and expensive perfume. I had barely stepped inside when Denise Turner appeared again. She wore an emerald green designer gown and diamonds that flashed beneath the lights every time she moved. Her smile looked strained today. "Good, Lola," she said quickly, walking toward me. "There you are?" I nodded calmly. "Big day." "Yes." She laughed nervously. "Very big day." Her eyes searched my face carefully, trying to read me, trying to determine whether I would behave. I smiled politely enough to confuse her. Then she lowered her voice. "I just want today to stay positive." There it was again. Not honest, not apology. Control. Everything was always about appearances with people like Denise. I looked directly at her. "Funny," I said quietly. "I want honesty." For a split second, fear flickered across her face. Then it disappeared beneath another polished smile. "Well," she said stiffly, "I'm sure emotions are high for everyone." She quickly excused herself after that. Coward. I walked slowly toward the bridal suite. The door stood partially open. Inside, bridesmaids moved around excitedly, while makeup artists worked beneath giant mirrors glowing with soft white lights. And there was Brianna, standing in the center of the room wearing her wedding gown. For a moment, I forgot everything. She looked breathtaking. The dress shimmered softly around her like something from an old Hollywood movie. Her hair fell in elegant curls over her shoulders. And suddenly, all I could see was my little girl playing dress-up in my bedroom 20 years earlier. "Mom?" Her voice trembled slightly when she saw me. The room quieted instantly. Every bridesmaid suddenly became very interested in lipstick tubes and flowers. They all knew something was wrong. Maybe not everything, but enough. I forced myself to smile. "You look beautiful." Brianna's eyes filled with instant tears. "Thank you." For one dangerous second, I almost lost my nerve. Because despite everything, she was still my daughter. Then I remembered sitting in that bank office staring at an empty future, and my resolve returned. Brianna stepped closer carefully. "Can we talk alone?" The bridesmaids disappeared from the room so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. Once the door closed behind them, silence swallowed us. Brianna twisted her hands nervously. "You've barely spoken to me. I've had a lot to think about." Tears gathered in her eyes immediately. "I know I hurt you." I stayed silent. I never wanted things to go this far. "How far did you want them to go?" She flinched. "That's not fair." I stared at her in disbelief. "Not fair." Her breathing quickened. "Caleb kept saying we'd fix everything after the wedding. There shouldn't have been anything to fix." She looked away. And there it was again. Avoidance. Not true accountability. Just panic now that consequences had arrived. I looked around the luxurious bridal suite slowly. Champagne buckets, designer shoes, professional lighting, customized robes embroidered with names. Everything paid for with stolen money. "You really thought this was worth it?" I asked quietly. Brianna's face crumpled. "You don't understand the pressure." "Then explain it to me." Her voice rose emotionally. "Everyone expected this wedding to be perfect. Who is everyone? People online? Caleb's family, his friends." I cut her off sharply. "And that mattered more than your mother's safety." She burst into tears. "Stop making me feel like a monster." The sentence echoed through the room. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I answered softly, "I'm not making you feel anything, Brianna." She covered her face, sobbing. And suddenly, I realized something devastating. My daughter still viewed herself as the victim, even now, even here. The knock on the door interrupted us. Caleb stepped inside, wearing his tuxedo. The moment he sensed tension, his entire posture changed. Protective, calculated. "Everything okay?" he asked carefully. Brianna wiped her face quickly. "We're fine." Caleb looked at me. I could see the nerves beneath his polished smile now. "Good." He walked closer. "Miss Lola, I just wanted to thank you again for coming today." I held his gaze calmly. "You're welcome." His jaw tightened, almost invisibly. He knew something was wrong. Maybe not what, but enough. Then he said quietly, "Brianna's under a lot of emotional stress." The audacity nearly stunned me. Emotional stress? As though this entire disaster had happened to them instead of because of them. I smiled faintly. "I imagine she is." He studied my face harder now, searching for weakness, searching for clues. But I'd spent decades working emergency rooms. I knew how to stay calm while people bled in front of me. Caleb finally nodded slowly. "Well, once the ceremony starts, everything will settle down." No, that's where he was wrong. Once the ceremony started, everything would explode. About an hour later, guests began filling the ballroom. The space looked almost unreal beneath golden chandeliers and towering white floral arrangements. A giant crystal backdrop shimmered behind the altar. Soft violin music floated through the room, and everywhere I looked, I saw people admiring the beauty of a wedding built on betrayal. I took my seat near the front quietly. Several guests smiled warmly at me, One older woman leaned over. "You must be so emotional today." I looked toward the altar. "Yes," I whispered truthfully. "I really am." Then the ceremony began. Caleb stood confidently at the front, smiling at guests like a politician shaking hands during a campaign. Brianna appeared moments later at the end of the aisle. The entire ballroom gasped. She looked radiant, fragile, terrified. As she walked past me, our eyes met briefly, and I saw it. Fear, real fear, because deep down, she knew. She knew I wasn't there simply as her mother anymore. I was there as the keeper of the truth. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Vows, music, applause, lies wrapped in elegance. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the ballroom erupted into cheers. I stayed seated, still, silent, watching, waiting. Because the real ceremony hadn't started yet. Not the one that mattered. Hours later, during the reception, champagne flowed freely while guests danced beneath sparkling lights. Everyone kept complimenting the wedding, the most beautiful ceremony I've ever seen. So elegant, absolutely perfect. Perfect. What a dangerous word. Eventually, the wedding planner approached me smiling brightly. "Mrs. Woods, we're ready for the mother of the bride speech." The moment had arrived. Across the ballroom, Brianna looked toward me nervously. Caleb's expression tightened instantly. Even Denise stopped smiling. I stood slowly. My heartbeat thundered so loudly, I could hear it in my ears. As I walked toward the microphone, Brianna hurried close beside me. Her voice trembled. "Please," she whispered desperately, "don't ruin my life." I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. Then I answered softly, "I'm not ruining it, sweetheart." I stepped onto the stage and reached for the microphone. "I'm revealing it." The ballroom fell strangely quiet the moment I touched the microphone. Not silent, completely. Just the kind of hush people make when they sense something unexpected is about to happen. Hundreds of tiny candlelights flickered across crystal glasses and gold table settings. Soft piano music still played faintly somewhere behind me, and directly in front of me sat my daughter in a white wedding gown bought with stolen money. For one brief second, my hands trembled so badly, I thought I might collapse. Then I looked down at Henry's folded letter resting beside my speech cards, and suddenly, I felt him with me. Steady, calm, strong. I lifted the microphone slowly. When Brianna was born, I began softly. I thought she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The guests smiled immediately. Some women touched their hearts, exactly what they expected. A sentimental mother of the bride speech. I looked at Brianna. Tears already filled her eyes. When she was little, I continued. She used to climb into bed with me during thunderstorms because she was afraid of the dark. A few guests chuckled gently. She believed I could protect her from anything. My voice almost cracked there. Because once upon a time, that had been true. I swallowed hard and continued. After my husband Henry died, Brianna became my entire world. Every decision I made, every sacrifice I made, was for her. Across the room, Caleb shifted slightly in his chair. He knew something was wrong now. Good. I continued calmly. I worked double shifts, missed holidays, skipped vacations. I saved every extra dollar I could because I wanted my daughter to have security someday. The ballroom remained completely still. No clinking glasses, no whispers, everyone listening. I thought that's what love looked like. I paused. Then slowly, I looked directly at Brianna. But sometimes, when you love someone without boundaries, they stop seeing your sacrifices as sacrifices. The atmosphere changed instantly, subtly, but unmistakably. People straightened in their seats, smiles faded. Confusion spread quietly across faces. Brianna's expression tightened with panic. "Mom," she whispered under her breath. I ignored her. "A few weeks ago," I said softly into the microphone, "I discovered that nearly my entire life savings had disappeared." The room froze. You could actually feel it, like oxygen leaving the space all at once. Caleb stood immediately. "Lola?" I raised one hand calmly. "No. Sit down." Something in my voice made him hesitate. I turned toward the large projection screen behind the dance floor. I originally planned to give my daughter a different wedding gift tonight. My hands no longer shook now. Not anymore. But that gift was taken from me before I had the chance. Brianna's face turned ghost white. "Mom, please." "So instead," I said quietly, "my wedding gift tonight is the truth." Then I nodded toward the DJ booth. The young technician looked confused for half a second before I handed him the USB drive Samuel had helped me prepare. "Please play the presentation." The screen behind me flickered to life. The first image appeared, an old photograph of Henry holding baby Brianna in the hospital. Several guests smiled again, uncertainly. Then another photo. Our first family Christmas, Brianna's dance recital, birthday cakes, family vacations. A life. A real life. Then the images changed. The next slide displayed a bank statement. Large highlighted withdrawals, electronic transfers, dates, amounts. The room went dead silent. Someone gasped softly near the back. Another slide appeared. Luxury wedding venue payments, bridal boutique charges, floral invoices, transfer confirmations. One by one. Methodically. Undeniably. I heard Denise whisper sharply, "Oh my God." Beside her, Caleb looked furious now. Not ashamed. Furious. Brianna had stopped crying entirely. She just stared at the screen like someone watching a building collapse around them. Then came the screenshots of text messages. "Mom can't figure out the account settings anyway. I already turned off the notifications. We just need enough time to get through the wedding." A murmur spread across the ballroom. Guests looked at each other in disbelief. One older man near the front actually removed his glasses slowly, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Caleb suddenly stood up. "This is insane!" he snapped loudly. "Turn this off." Nobody moved. I looked directly at him. "No!" He pointed angrily toward the screen. "You're humiliating your daughter." I stared at him calmly. "No," I said quietly. "The humiliation started when you helped her steal from her widowed mother." The room exploded into whispers. Several guests looked visibly horrified now. Brianna finally stood shakily from her chair. "Mom, stop!" Her voice sounded small. Broken. For one dangerous second, guilt stabbed through me. Then, another slide appeared, a transfer linked directly to Turner Event Consulting, LLC. Caleb's business account. The ballroom reacted audibly this time. People turned toward Caleb immediately. He looked trapped. Cornered. Good. I lifted the microphone again. For 40 years, I said steadily, I worked to build financial security after losing my husband. I trusted my daughter with my accounts because she was family. My voice hardened slightly. She used that trust to drain nearly everything I had. Brianna shook her head desperately. I was going to pay it back. The words echoed through the ballroom. Too late. Much too late. I looked at her sadly. With what money, she had no answer. Just like before. The screen changed again. This time, Henry's letter appeared. Only one sentence enlarged across the entire ballroom wall. If you ever start believing your mother exists to sacrifice endlessly for you, you will break her heart without even realizing you're doing it. The entire room went still again. Completely still. I could barely breathe as I read the words aloud, because hearing Henry's voice in that room somehow made everything even more painful. Brianna burst into sobs. Real sobs this time. Not defensive, not manipulative, broken, and for the first time all night, I finally saw shame in her face. Caleb, however, looked enraged. He walked toward the stage aggressively. "This is private family business," he snapped. "You had no right to do this publicly." I met his gaze without flinching. "You made it public when you spent stolen money in front of 300 guests. Several people actually nodded. One woman whispered, "She's right." Caleb turned toward Brianna desperately. "Say something." But Brianna couldn't even look at him anymore. She just stared at the floor crying. I took one slow breath before continuing. "I didn't come here tonight to destroy my daughter." That surprised the room. Even Brianna looked up. "I came because silence protects the wrong people." I slowly removed a folder from beneath the podium. "These documents have already been reviewed by legal counsel?" Caleb's face changed instantly. True fear this time. Finally, I looked directly at Brianna. "You still have a choice." The ballroom remained breathlessly silent. "You can admit what you did. Sign the restitution agreement Samuel Brooks prepared. Commit to repaying every dollar taken from me." I paused. "Or I allow the legal process to continue." A collective gasp moved through the room. Denise stood abruptly. "You can't threaten her at her own wedding." I looked toward her calmly. "Actually," I said softly, "she threatened me with losing my daughter if I reported the theft." Denise went silent immediately. Because it was true. Everything was true now. No more polished lies. No more appearances. Just truth. Raw and ugly beneath the chandeliers. Brianna looked completely shattered. "Mom?" she whispered weakly. I stepped down from the stage slowly. Then I walked toward her through the silent ballroom. Every guest watched. Every camera. Every pair of eyes. When I finally stood in front of my daughter, I spoke softly enough that only nearby tables could hear clearly. "I loved you enough to give you everything I said." Tears streamed down her face. "But tonight, I whispered I finally loved myself enough to stop. And for the first time in my entire life, I walked away from my daughter instead of rescuing her." The silence after I stepped away from Brianna felt almost unreal. 300 people stood trapped between luxury and scandal champagne glasses, frozen halfway to their mouths, while the truth hung over the ballroom like smoke after an explosion. Nobody knew what to do next. Not the guests, not the wedding planner, not even the band. The violinists had stopped playing sometime during the presentation, and now the room echoed only with Brianna's uneven sobbing. I kept walking slowly toward the ballroom exit. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just tired. So unbelievably tired. Then Caleb's voice shattered the silence. "This is unbelievable." I stopped walking, but didn't turn around. He sounded furious now. Not guilty, not ashamed. Furious. "You wait until the wedding reception to publicly attack us?" he snapped. Murmurs spread again through the crowd. I finally turned slowly toward him. Caleb stood near the center of the ballroom, jaw clenched, tightly tuxedo perfect image collapsing. And suddenly, I understood something important about men like him. They can survive almost anything except humiliation, especially public humiliation. I looked at him calmly. "You attacked me the moment you helped steal my savings. That's not what happened." "Oh," I tilted my head slightly. "Then explain the transfers into your business account." His eyes darkened instantly. That money was temporary? There it is again, I said softly. The word temporary. I stepped a little closer. Funny how people always call theft temporary when they're spending someone else's money. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. One older man near the back muttered, "Jesus Christ." Caleb ran a frustrated hand through his hair. You don't understand the pressure Brianna was under. At that, something in me finally hardened completely. Because even now, even after being exposed, he was still trying to turn Brianna into the victim. I looked directly at him. No, I said quietly. You don't understand what pressure looks like. The ballroom fell silent again. Pressure is burying your husband at 46 years old and still going to work the next morning because your daughter needs groceries. Caleb said nothing. Pressure is choosing between paying your heating bill or replacing your winter shoes. I took another step toward him. Pressure is spending 40 years terrified of becoming a burden when you get old. The room felt frozen, and after all of that, I continued softly. You stood in my kitchen and told me families help each other. Caleb's face flushed dark red. Beside him, Brianna looked physically sick now. Good. Maybe for the first time in years, she was finally seeing reality without excuses protecting her. Denise Turner suddenly stood up from her table. This entire thing is disgusting, she snapped loudly. You should be ashamed of yourself, Lola. I turned toward her slowly, ashamed of what exactly humiliating your daughter publicly. My voice stayed calm. She publicly spent stolen money. That was a private matter.
No, I answered sharply for the first time all evening. A private matter is borrowing a sweater without permission. Draining your widowed mother's savings account to finance a luxury wedding is fraud. Several guests nodded visibly. Denise looked stunned that people weren't rallying behind her. Women like Denise believed appearances could fix anything. But appearances stop working once proof enters the room. Caleb suddenly pointed toward me angrily. You're acting like Brianna did this alone.
The entire ballroom shifted again, because there it was, the crack, the beginning of blame. I looked at him carefully. She didn't. For the first time all evening, true panic crossed Caleb's face. Brianna turned toward him slowly. What does that mean? He looked at her quickly. Babe? I interrupted calmly. It means several large transfers went directly into your business account. The room erupted into whispers again. Brianna stared at Caleb in disbelief. You told me that account was for vendor coordination. Caleb's composure slipped further. It was. Then why was my mother's money in it? Because I was handling payments? $20,000, she cried. People nearby visibly reacted at the amount. Caleb lowered his voice urgently. Brianna, not here. No, she snapped suddenly. Answer me. The entire dynamic changed right there. For the first time, Brianna stopped speaking like Caleb's partner and started sounding like another victim. Caleb looked around desperately at the staring guests. This isn't the place for this conversation. Brianna laughed bitterly through tears. You didn't seem worried about timing when you convinced me to steal from my mother. The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, shock. Even the wedding staff had stopped pretending not to listen. Caleb's face went pale instantly. Don't say it like that. How should I say it? Brianna shouted. How should I describe what we did? We, not I, we! There it was, finally. The truth standing naked in the middle of the ballroom. Denise rushed toward them immediately. Brianna, sweetheart, calm down. No. Brianna stepped backward violently. Mascara streaked down her face now.
her perfect bridal image dissolving in real time. You all kept telling me this wedding mattered more than anything.
Denise looked horrified.
We only wanted what was best for you.
No, Brianna whispered brokenly.
You wanted what looked best.
That sentence hit harder than she probably realized, because it was true. Not just about Denise, about Brianna too. Maya Collins slowly stood from one of the bridesmaid tables. Her hands shook visibly. There's something else people should know. Caleb whipped around immediately. Maya, sit down. She ignored him. A brave girl. Terrified. But brave.
I heard Caleb talking a few weeks ago, she said shakily. He said Lola's savings were only the beginning. The room became deathly still. Brianna stared at Caleb. What Caleb's voice turned sharp instantly. She misunderstood. Maya shook her head. No, I didn't. She swallowed hard. You said once the wedding was over, Brianna could convince her mom to help with the house too. The house. Several people actually gasped aloud. My stomach twisted even though I already knew. Hearing it publicly still hurt. Brianna looked like she might faint. You told me we'd never ask my mother for anything again. Caleb stepped toward her quickly. Baby, listen to me. No? She backed away again. You lied to me. I was trying to build a future for us. With stolen money, Caleb's face finally cracked completely then. All the charm, all the polish, gone. And underneath it was exactly what Henry would have recognized immediately. Entitlement, anger, greed. You know what? Caleb snapped suddenly. Everybody's acting like I forced you to do this. Brianna froze. You accessed the accounts, he continued coldly. You moved the money. The ballroom erupted again, because now he was throwing her under the bus completely. Brianna stared at him like she'd been slapped. You said we were a team. We are. No, she whispered. We're not. Caleb looked around wildly now, realizing control was disappearing fast. Then he made the worst mistake of his life. He looked directly at me and shouted, She was sitting on all that money anyway. The room went silent so fast it felt violent. Even Caleb seemed to realize immediately what he'd just said. But it was too late. Every mask in the ballroom had fallen. Brianna looked physically horrified. Denise covered her mouth. Several guests openly stared at Caleb with disgust. I just stood there quietly, because suddenly I felt nothing toward him anymore. Not anger, not hatred, nothing. Men like Caleb weren't complicated. They simply believed other people existed to fund the lives they thought they deserved. Brianna's voice broke completely. Oh my God. She looked at him like she was finally seeing the real man beneath the expensive suits and polished smiles. You really believed that? Caleb reached for her desperately. Brianna. She stepped away immediately. No. Tears streamed down her face. You didn't love me. That's not true. You loved what you thought you could get through me. That sentence echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot, and for the first time all night, I finally saw Caleb speechless. For a few long seconds after Brianna spoke, nobody in the ballroom moved. Caleb stood frozen in the middle of the shattered reception, his mouth slightly open like a man watching his own reflection collapse in front of him. The chandeliers still sparkled overhead. The champagne still flowed from the fountain beside the dance floor. The band remained awkwardly frozen near the stage. Everything looked beautiful and completely ruined. Brianna slowly lifted her left hand and stared at the wedding ring trembling on her finger. The entire ballroom watched her. Every guest, every bridesmaid, every member of Caleb's family.
I could almost feel people holding their breath. Then with shaking fingers, Brianna slid the ring off. A soft gasp moved through the crowd. Caleb's face drained instantly. "Brianna!" Her voice broke as she looked at him. "You used me. No, baby, listen. You used my mother. That's not fair." She laughed bitterly through tears. "Fair," she whispered. "You're talking about fair." Caleb stepped closer desperately. "We can fix this." "No," Brianna said weakly. "You can't." Then she placed the ring carefully on the nearest table, beside half-empty champagne glasses and floral centerpieces worth more than some people's monthly rent. And just like that, the wedding ended. Not with screaming, not with violence, with truth. Denise Turner rushed forward immediately. "Don't do this," she hissed sharply. "Not in front of everyone." Brianna looked at her slowly. Why, she asked brokenly. "Because people might see who we really are." Denise looked genuinely offended by the question, which told me everything I needed to know about her. Appearances still mattered more to her than morality. Caleb reached for Brianna's arm again. This time, she jerked away instantly. "Don't touch me." His calm, polished image had fully disappeared now. "You're seriously ending everything over one mistake." The entire room reacted to that sentence. One mistake. As if draining a widow's life savings was forgetting an anniversary. Brianna stared at him in disbelief. "One mistake," she whispered. "You're emotional right now." I almost laughed at that. Classic Caleb. Even now he was trying to control the narrative, trying to convince Brianna her own emotions weren't trustworthy. But something inside my daughter had finally cracked open. And once a person truly sees manipulation, they can never fully unsee it. "You told me my mother would recover," Brianna said shakily. Caleb sighed in frustration. "She will recover. You said she didn't need the money." "She doesn't." The room exploded again. Several guests openly shook their heads now. One older woman near the front muttered, "That man's a parasite." She wasn't wrong. Brianna looked physically sick. "Oh my God," she whispered again almost to herself. "I really believed you." Caleb softened his voice instantly. "Babe, I was trying to build a future for us. With my mother's money. With family support." "It wasn't support," Brianna cried suddenly. "We stole from her." There it was again, not softened, not excused. The truth. Caleb's face hardened. "You're acting like some innocent victim now." The cruelty in his voice stunned even Denise. Brianna blinked at him. "What you accessed, the accounts," he snapped. "You moved the money. You made choices too." The words hit her like physical blows, because deep down, she knew he was right. And for the first time all evening, I saw my daughter stop running from that truth. Slowly, Brianna looked toward me. God, I will never forget that look. Not because it asked for forgiveness, because it finally understood pain. Real pain, not embarrassment, not stress. Pain. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." The entire ballroom fell silent again. I believed her this time. Not completely. Not enough to erase what happened, but enough to know the mask had finally fallen off. I looked at my daughter standing there in her ruined wedding dress mascara, streaked across her cheeks, surrounded by the wreckage of her own choices, and despite everything, my heart still broke for her. That's what motherhood is. Even when your child destroys you, part of you still wants to hold them while they cry. But another part of me, the part Henry had spent years trying to strengthen, finally understood something important. Love without accountability destroys everyone involved. Caleb suddenly pointed toward me angrily.
She set you up. Brianna slowly turned back toward him. No, she said weakly. She exposed us. She humiliated you in front of everyone. You humiliated me, Brianna whispered. For once, Caleb had no response. Around us, guests had started quietly gathering their purses and jackets. Some slipped toward the exits awkwardly. Others stayed frozen, unable to look away. A wedding planner stood near the stage, looking like she might faint. The band members stared at the floor, pretending not to exist. And still, the flowers smelled beautiful. That part haunted me afterward. How something could look so beautiful while rotting underneath. Denise stepped toward me suddenly. "You're happy now," she snapped. I looked at her calmly. No. That answer surprised her. Maybe she expected triumph, vindication, but I felt none of those things. Only sadness, deep, exhausting sadness. "My daughter's life just collapsed," I said quietly. "Why would I be happy?" Denise crossed her arms tightly. "You could have handled this privately." I stared at her for a long moment. "She already handled it privately," I replied softly. "For weeks." Denise had no answer. Because once truth enters a room, excuses become much harder to maintain. Suddenly, Brianna turned toward Caleb one last time. "Were you ever going to tell me about the debts?" His face tightened immediately. "That's not relevant." Her voice cracked. "It's relevant to me." He ran a hand through his hair angrily. I was handling it. With my mother's money, he didn't answer. That silence said enough. Brianna closed her eyes briefly. Then she whispered, "I almost destroyed my mother for you." For a moment, Caleb looked genuinely desperate. "I love you." But Brianna shook her head slowly. "No," she said through tears. "You loved what I could give you." The sentence landed like a final verdict. Caleb's shoulders sagged slightly, because deep down, he knew it was true too. Then Brianna turned away from him completely. And just like that, the relationship ended. No dramatic music, no cinematic explosion, just the quiet death of illusion. I looked toward the ballroom exit. I suddenly felt very old, very tired. I had no interest in watching the rest of the collapse, so I picked up my purse slowly and started walking toward the doors. Behind me, chaos immediately erupted again. Denise yelling, guests whispering, wedding staff scrambling, Caleb calling Brianna's name repeatedly. But I kept walking. For once in my life, I chose myself first. I had almost reached the parking lot when I heard heels running behind me. "Mom," I stopped. Brianna ran toward me through the warm Charleston night, clutching the sides of her wedding dress to keep from tripping. When she reached me, she collapsed into sobs all over again. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry." I stood there silently beneath the glow of the parking lot lights. Cars passed in the distance. Music still faintly echoed from the ballroom behind us. Brianna looked so small suddenly, like the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. "I didn't know he was like this," she whispered. I looked at her carefully. "No," I said softly, "but you still knew what you were doing to me." That truth hit her hard. She lowered her head immediately. "I know." Then she whispered the question she'd been terrified to ask all night. "Are you going to call the police?" I took a long breath before answering. Samuel prepared a restitution agreement. She blinked through tears. "What you will sign legal documents acknowledging everything that happened." Her breathing shook violently. "You'll repay every dollar." She nodded quickly. "I will. You'll cooperate fully if investigators ask questions about Caleb's finances." Another nod. "And you'll start therapy." That surprised her. What you need help understanding why you thought this was acceptable? Fresh tears rolled down her face. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. Forgiveness does not erase consequences, Brianna. She broke down crying again. And standing there in that parking lot, for the first time since this nightmare began, I finally saw the possibility that losing everything might be the only thing capable of saving her. The wedding disappeared from the internet faster than I expected. 3 days after the reception collapsed, nearly every photo and video from Brianna's social media accounts vanished. No more smiling bridal clips, no more luxury wedding countdowns, no more champagne tastings or flower previews. Just silence. But silence online never means silence in real life. People talked. Of course they did. Friends called friends. Guests shared stories. Someone leaked part of the ballroom presentation online before it was quickly removed. Within a week, Brianna's dream wedding had quietly transformed into whispered gossip across half of Charleston and parts of Cleveland. The bride stole from her mother. The groom had secret debts. The reception turned into a public scandal. I should probably admit something ugly here. A small part of me wanted people to know the truth. Not because I wanted Brianna humiliated forever, but because, for once, I didn't want to carry shame that belonged to someone else. For decades, I had protected everyone around me from consequences. Henry used to joke that I apologized when other people stepped on my foot, and maybe he was right. But not anymore. About 2 weeks after the wedding, Brianna came to the house for the first official meeting with Samuel Brooks. She looked different already. Smaller somehow. Not physically, spiritually. The expensive confidence she once carried everywhere had disappeared. No designer handbag, no glamorous makeup, no polished social media smile. Just exhaustion. Samuel sat at my dining room table reviewing paperwork while Brianna quietly signed document after document. Restitution agreements, financial disclosures, repayment schedules, acknowledgement of unauthorized account access. Every signature seemed to age her another year. At one point, her hand started trembling so badly she had to stop. Samuel slid a glass of water toward her gently. "You understand these terms?" he asked calmly. "Yes. If payments stop or evidence is withheld, legal proceedings may continue." "I understand." Her voice barely sounded like Brianna anymore. When Samuel finally stepped outside to take a phone call, silence filled the kitchen. Brianna stared at the paperwork for a long time. Then she whispered, "I never thought my life would end up like this." I looked at her quietly. It didn't happen overnight. She flinched, because she knew I was right. This disaster didn't begin with Caleb. It began years earlier. With entitlement, with avoidance, with believing appearances mattered more than integrity. Finally, she looked up at me. "Do you hate me?" The question hurt more than I expected, because despite everything, I didn't. I hated what she had done. I hated the selfishness, the lies, the betrayal. But hate-number mothers rarely get that luxury. "I don't hate you," I said honestly. Fresh tears filled her eyes immediately. "But I don't trust you either." That hurt her far more. Good. Trust should hurt when it breaks. After she left that day, I walked through the house feeling strangely hollow. I had won, at least technically. The truth came out. The money would eventually be repaid. Caleb was gone. So why didn't victory feel better? Because there are no real winners when family destroys itself. A month later, I learned Caleb had left Charleston entirely after several creditors began contacting him aggressively. Apparently, the wedding gifts and honeymoon deposits he'd counted on never arrived the way he expected. Good. But strangely, I didn't feel satisfaction anymore, only exhaustion. One afternoon, Maya Collins stopped by the house carrying a peach pie from a local bakery. We sat together at my kitchen table while rain tapped softly against the windows. "She's trying," Maya said carefully. I stirred my coffee slowly, trying what to change. I stayed quiet. Maya hesitated. She got a second job. That surprised me slightly. She sold the Mercedes too. Now that truly shocked me. Brianna loved that car almost absurdly. She used to call it her reward for surviving adulthood. Apparently, adulthood had become much more expensive lately. Maya continued carefully. She moved into a smaller apartment. A really small one. I nodded silently. She's also seeing a therapist twice a week. That one mattered more to me than the jobs or the car, because money problems can force temporary humility. Real accountability is harder. Maya looked at me gently. She knows she destroyed something important. I stared out the window for a long moment. So do I. Around that same time, I started therapy myself. At first, I almost canceled the appointment 3 different times. Women my age weren't raised to talk openly about emotional wounds, especially not mothers. We were taught to survive quietly, to endure, to sacrifice, to keep family secrets buried. But secrets are heavy things, and I was tired of carrying them alone. My therapist, Dr. Elaine Foster, asked me a question during our second session that completely stunned me. "Lola," she said gently, "when was the last time you made a decision purely for yourself?" I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again, because honestly, I couldn't remember. Not clearly, not even before Henry died. My entire identity had revolved around caring for someone else for so long that I no longer knew what caring for myself even looked like. That realization was both devastating and strangely freeing. So I started small, tiny things. I bought myself a new winter coat without guilt. I replaced the broken lamp in the living room instead of saying maybe next year. I started taking morning walks instead of automatically volunteering for every extra shift at church or the hospital. One Saturday, I even drove 2 hours alone just to sit beside Lake Erie and eat lunch near the water. Henry would have loved that day. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Not happy exactly, but present, alive. Meanwhile, Brianna kept making payments exactly as promised. Every month. On time. No excuses. No emotional manipulation attached. Just checks mailed quietly through Samuel's office. And somehow that consistency affected me more than dramatic apologies ever could. Because responsibility repeated over time means more than tears during a crisis. Then 3 months after the wedding disaster, Samuel called me unexpectedly. "There's been a development." My stomach tightened immediately. "What kind of development? Your daughter contacted financial investigators voluntarily." I sat up straighter. What she provided: communications, transaction records, and information regarding Caleb's debts and business accounts? I was speechless. Samuel continued carefully. "She did not have to do that." "No, she didn't, especially because cooperating further could expose her own involvement more deeply too." I sat quietly absorbing the information. Finally, I whispered, "Why would she do that?" Samuel paused. "Maybe because she's finally telling the truth without being forced to." That sentence stayed with me all night. Because for months I had viewed Brianna entirely through the lens of betrayal. And maybe understandably so. But suddenly, for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder something terrifying. What if my daughter truly was changing? Not magically. Not perfectly, but genuinely. That possibility frightened me almost as much as the betrayal itself. Because forgiveness is dangerous. Hope is dangerous. especially after trust has been shattered. A week later, I found another handwritten letter in my mailbox. From Brianna. I almost threw it away unopened. Instead, I carried it inside and stared at it on the kitchen counter for nearly an hour. Finally, I opened it. The first sentence alone made me cry. Mom, I think I spent most of my life confusing love with rescue. I sank slowly into a chair and kept reading. For the first time in years, the words sounded honest, not defensive, not manipulative. Honest. And sitting there alone in my kitchen with tears running down my face, I realized something difficult. My daughter had finally begun the painful process of becoming an adult. Not because she got married, because she was finally learning that choices have consequences. And sometimes consequences are the only thing strong enough to save a person from themselves. A year after the wedding collapsed, my life looked nothing like I imagined it would. And strangely enough, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The first warm day of spring arrived quietly in Cleveland that year. The kind of soft morning where sunlight spills across the porch like honey, and the air smells faintly of thawing earth and rain. I stood outside my house, watering flower boxes Henry built for me nearly 20 years earlier. For the first time in a long time, the house no longer felt like a place where grief lived. It felt like mine again, not a monument to sacrifice, not a future waiting to be stolen. Mine. I had repainted the kitchen, fixed the porch railing, bought new curtains instead of apologizing for needing them. Tiny things. But after decades of placing myself last, tiny things felt revolutionary. Inside, soft jazz played from the old radio near the stove while coffee brewed. Simple peace. Real peace. Not the artificial kind built from appearances. And Brianna. She was still rebuilding. Slowly, painfully, honestly. She now lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment outside Columbus and worked 2 jobs marketing during the day and bookkeeping for a small fitness studio at night. The luxury handbags disappeared. The endless social media posts disappeared. The version of Brianna who needed strangers online to admire her had quietly faded away. Every month she continued making payments exactly as promised. No reminders, no excuses. Sometimes the checks arrived with short handwritten notes. Still trying. Thank you for not giving up on me. I know trust takes time. I never responded directly. Not at first. Healing doesn't move in straight lines. Some days, I missed my daughter so much my chest physically hurt. Other days, I remembered sitting in that bank office and felt cold all over again. Trust once shattered heals slower than love. But it can heal, at least partially. That spring marked the anniversary of Henry's death. Every year since losing him, I visited the cemetery alone early in the morning before crowds arrived. But this year, when I opened my front door to leave, Brianna stood on the porch, holding white lilies. Henry's favorite. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked nervous. Not polished nervous. Human nervous. Hi, Mom. I nodded slowly. Hi. She held up the flowers awkwardly. I thought maybe we could visit Dad together. The old version of Brianna would have made the moment about herself immediately. This version waited quietly for my answer. That mattered. So after a long pause, I stepped aside. Come in for coffee first. Relief flooded her face so quickly it almost made me smile. Inside the kitchen, she sat carefully at the table like someone afraid to touch fragile glass. I noticed things about her immediately. The dark circles beneath her eyes, the simpler clothes, the absence of expensive jewelry. She looked older, somehow. Not physically, honestly. Life had finally reached her. After a few minutes, she pulled an envelope from her purse. This month's payment, she said softly. I accepted it with a small nod. Then she surprised me. There's also something else. She slid another folded paper across the table. A full financial report. Budget breakdowns. Debt repayment progress. Savings contributions. I looked up at her in confusion. My therapist suggested transparency, she explained quietly. Since I abused trust financially? The sentence stunned me. Not because it sounded rehearsed, because it didn't. There was no defensiveness attached, no performance, just accountability. I looked back down at the paperwork. You didn't have to show me this. I know. A long silence followed. Then Brianna whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I finally understand why Dad worried about me. That sentence pierced straight through me. Because Henry had worried. Not that Brianna was evil, but that she confused being loved with being entitled. I stood slowly and walked toward the cabinet above the refrigerator. Then I pulled down the old letter Henry wrote before he died. The same letter that shattered the wedding reception. Brianna watched silently as I unfolded it carefully. I want to read something to you, I said softly. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. I began reading aloud. If you ever start believing your mother exists to sacrifice endlessly for you, you will break her heart without even realizing you're doing it. Brianna broke instantly. She covered her face, crying quietly while I continued. Real love requires responsibility. Someday, your mother will grow older, and when that happens, I hope you protect her the way she protected you. The room felt impossibly still. Even the coffee pot had stopped making noise. When I finished reading, neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Brianna whispered through tears, I failed both of you. I sat back down slowly. Yes, I answered honestly. She nodded immediately, not arguing, not explaining, just accepting it. And somehow that honesty mattered more than perfect apologies ever could. Fresh tears slid down her cheeks. I would do anything to undo what I did. I looked at my daughter carefully. No, I said softly. You wouldn't. She looked confused. You can't undo it. That truth hurt both of us. But I continued gently. You can decide who you become after it. Brianna cried harder then, not dramatic crying. The kind that comes from finally seeing yourself clearly. And strangely, I felt proud of her. Not for what she did. Never that. But for finally having the courage to face it honestly. We visited Henry's grave together that afternoon. The cemetery was quiet except for birds moving through the trees overhead. Brianna placed the white lilies carefully against the headstone before stepping back beside me. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. Wind moved softly through the grass around us, and standing there between grief and forgiveness, I realized something important. The wedding surprise I gave Brianna that night had never really been about revenge. At least, not entirely. Yes, part of me wanted consequences. Part of me wanted truth exposed. But another part, maybe the wiser part Henry spent years trying to strengthen, understood something deeper. If I had stayed silent, Brianna would have continued becoming someone neither of us recognized. A woman who justified betrayal whenever it benefited her. A woman who confused image with worth. A woman willing to sacrifice the people who loved her most. And Caleb, he would have destroyed her eventually. Maybe financially, maybe emotionally, maybe both. The truth shattered her life, but lies would have ruined it completely. As we walked back toward the car, Brianna looked at me carefully. Do you think you'll ever trust me again? The question hung painfully between us. I answered honestly. Not the same way. She lowered her eyes immediately.
But that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Tears filled her eyes again. I reached over slowly and squeezed her hand. The first time I had touched her like that since the wedding. Love without boundaries almost destroyed both of us, I said softly. She nodded through tears. I know. And from now on, I continued gently, we build something healthier. Not perfect. Healthier. For the first time in over a year, Brianna smiled through tears that weren't entirely filled with shame. And as we drove away from the cemetery beneath the warm spring sunlight, I realized something surprising. I hadn't lost my daughter completely, after all. But I had finally stopped losing myself to save her. And that changed everything.